very important that as we move forward, that we continue to work on studies to better understand the water resource in that region. Section 4 basically just talks about if the division or EPD is going to predict a drought for the season, they need to do it by March the 1st. And believe me, when you come out of winter, if it ain't rained, you know by March the 1st you're going to have problems. It's not rocket scientist theory to figure that out. So thank God we got a lot of rain this year, because I think probably September and October, as I was traveling the state, I think that's the driest I've ever seen it. I'd never seen creeks dried up, wetlands dried up, and I saw a guy bush hogging in his pond. I knew that was a bad sign. So if we not gotten the rain that we got during the wintertime, we would be in a major crisis right now. So we are very blessed. Also talks about the irrigation reduction auction in there, where if we are in drought and EPD figures out about how much irrigated acreage we need to take out of production that year, as far as irrigation goes to it, they can have an auction to accomplish that, so people can get paid some money to help them through this tough time also. Section 5 basically goes back again and lays out the studies we need to do, and we added in there the Georgia Water, talking about, it says state, federal agencies, universities, and we added in there the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center in Albany, because they're extremely tied to agriculture, and we felt like they need to be in that process because they understand agriculture, and so we tied them in to doing all the studies. It talks about hydraulic studies, studies to develop flow targets, studies to enhance baseline information. So it just goes on down there and talks about the different things we do. And I'll say this, agriculture has really been at the table over the last 8 years. They have been a great partner in trying to develop ways to become more efficient in their water use. And they have done a great job. When we talk about irrigation, the new systems today are so much more efficient than the old systems, and so a lot of good technology has been coming along there. Then it lays out the different efficiencies of irrigation systems and the age of when they were permitted as to what year they need to try to get up to about an 80% proficiency or efficiency, and so each age of those systems is how many years you have out to meet that 80% efficiency rate. Then if you apply for a new permit today, groundwater or surface water, your efficiency would have to be 80% right out of the gate, because you'd basically have a new system anyway, probably. There is a section in here that talks about stream augmentation in the bill, and basically what we're doing there in times of severe drought, we have to try to help augment some of the flows in some of the big tributaries and things down there that will feed into the river system. And the reason you do that during those very difficult times of extreme drought is to help from losing any species that you could get involved in the endangered species. So when you talk about, I hear people say, well, we don't want to augment flow. Well, that's not very smart. Augmenting flow is a good thing, and it helps from us losing species from severe drought. And that section 6 just is about compliance and violations. And with that, Mr. Chairman, it's not really that complicated of issue and not loaded with a lot of rocket scientists. It's just trying to be rational and trying to make these positive steps as we go along, because we have to be more and more and more and more efficient with our water resource.
Do you mind, since the director of EPD is here, if you get a hold of some technical questions from the committee that he help you answer?
You know, I'm glad he's here because I'd love to let him. I'm just a country boy.
Also, I think I'm the only one here that was here when we did the one in 1999, other than the former director of EPD, Mr. Harold Reheis, and if you need any historical questions, I'm sure his mind is better than mine. If there's any technical stuff, goes back to that. Oh, that's Richard back there. Okay. Well, I mean, I know I was talking about on the committee that's here, but I know those two that live down in the lower Flint are the ones that stirred this hornet nest up back in '99.
So we have somebody to blame it on. Good.
Yeah. So I'll entertain some questions for the committee to the chairman if you have any. There's several speakers that want to speak, but let's get any questions out of your mind right now, if that's okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Colliston, I'm Regina Quick from Athens, and I'm just going to forewarn you. It's going to sound like a cross-examination because I'm a lawyer. It's not my intent
Yes, all right.
to put you on the hot seat this morning, but I do have some questions, and I'm coming at this, just so you know, from a perspective of private property rights and our riparian rights in Georgia being private property rights for all our landowners. And I guess my first question is with regard to the very first page, section 1, where we're changing the legislative intent of this act to include programs to augment stream flows. And I'd just like you to talk to me generally about what you think that means, since it is an expansion. If it's not an expansion, we wouldn't need to do it. If the EPD already had the authority to do it, we wouldn't need to put it here. So it's an expansion of the rights of the EPD to regulate those property rights. What are we talking about there?
Well, when you look at programs to augment stream flow, when you get in times of severe drought, and I think Spring Creek is one of the nice sized creeks that totally went dry down in the southwest region, and we put a well to augment flow during those really dry times, because we think we're worse off if we let them go dry. And if you get into losing different species because you let it go dry, we're not really changing anything. If we're gonna, I mean, if you look at rights, water rights, then you would say, well, we should never have to get a permit. You say, well, it's just my right to use the water. So I think when you're looking at a crisis, we have to make decisions so that we can all survive through that crisis. In that southwest Georgia region, obviously it buffers Florida, and we're trying to do things that are positive for the southwest Georgia region and for our neighbors to the south of us.
But the permitting process, as I understand it, is to regulate what is the reasonable use of that property, of the property right, of the water.
You have two choices. You can just leave it alone and pray over it, and when you get in severe drought, and those studies about interconnectivity of surface water and groundwater are so important too, or you can let it go dry and have a federal court set your policy for you. And I don't think that's really a good idea. I think what we're doing is, and we're working with the people in that southwest Georgia region also, is that we're trying to do the things that will keep them afloat in dry times. And I think that's very important.
Well, my approach is, and the way I'm trying to look at this is, I'm really not wanting to sacrifice any more property rights than I have to on the altar of the EPA, just frankly. So what I'm trying to figure out is what we're talking about here when we're talking about expanding the scope of the legislative intent to allow programs to augment stream flows within this framework. What kind of programs? Could you give us some examples?
Well, we did a well down on Spring Creek, a well to augment the flow into that Spring Creek because it was getting really dry.
And I'm sorry, who is we they?
Well, the state basically funded a well on Spring Creek to help bring flows back up because it was drying up. We can either have a dry ditch or we can have a flow of water. And all those like Spring Creek and all those are the big tributaries that feed into the river. So if we just let them all go dry, the river's going to go dry too. And the rivers, the Flint and things like that, they're not deep rivers. So it's even more imperative that we try to augment during those dry times. And fortunately, like we've had this rain this winter, you can go by the Flint and it's got a really nice flow of water in it along with everything else. But if we do not try to manage through that process, you're talking about losing rights. Let the federal court come in and dictate the water policy down there, and that would be bad.
But if that was already done, why is this change in the law necessary? If that was already done under some existing framework, either the Code of Federal Regulations or the EPD regs, why is this change in the law necessary if we're already doing it?
Well, I think these make the statement of what we're trying to do down there. When you put it into this drought protection language that's already in law, this is telling the intent going forward of why we're trying to do the things that we're doing to keep that part of the world economically viable.
Regina, you mind if Judd adds to help answer your question?
Oh, that's right. And I don't want to dominate the discussion.
That's all right.
I'm sorry, I had so many follow-up questions.
That's okay.
Thanks, sir.
Representative Quick, thank you for your question. Let me just try to add to what the chairman said there. I think that the real intent behind why we at EPD think we need this language is not, we don't view it as an expansion or alteration of the riparian system we have in Georgia, which is a regulated riparian system. But here's what I think motivated that language. It's not to authorize the augmentation where it's not authorized. It's to be clear about the fact that when the state does this program and we've got these surface water withdrawal permits that already exist, which could be based on who knows where we augment in the future, could be 50 feet from where we put it in the river. We've got we need to be clear that we're going to go in there and modify those permits, not to take what would be the ability to take reasonable use of the water that wouldn't otherwise be there, but the water only that the state's investing to put in that river. I think I've got the authority to do that now, but I guarantee you, and this committee knows this, that the minute I tried to do that on those agricultural permits that already exist, I'm going to have 2 or 3 years of litigation to work through all that. I think I've always thought going through the front door and being straight with folks is the best way to do. And the way we would do it, it would obviously be through if we didn't have this language, it would be through the Water Control Act and the emergency powers. But it's not an expansion of the EPD's authority. We've got other examples around the state, but in the farm context, this is about not authorizing augmentation to begin with, but to be clear about when we go in to protect that flow. Because if we're just going to drink it 50 feet after we put it in, we're not going to do it, and then we're going to be left without a tool in the toolbox. This is not, augmentation isn't the end-all be-all. It's not the silver bullet. It's not going to be the one thing that lets us just continue to do whatever we want. It is about being one tool in the toolbox that we add together, and as the chairman said, this is just sort of one step along that way. If you know, my commitment to everybody is we're going to continue to work on those studies, and we'll be back. I mean, it's going to be with us for the rest of, if we do our job being the state, and certainly my job at EPD, we're going to continue to work on how we steward this resource with all these multiple uses, from the Endangered Species Act all the way to our economic development interests. And the good news is I think we live in a region, even with these ever-increasing droughts, where we've got water to steward, and if we do this well, we can manage through.
May I ask you? Thank you, Mr. Director. Is there existing regulation in the Georgia regs or the code somewhere or the Code of Federal Regulations that define augmentation and give us some direction and framework guidance for what it is we're opening up you guys to do here?
Well, I'm not aware of existing augmentation language in the code.
I couldn't find any, so
Right.
we're using a term that I couldn't find defined anywhere.
And you know, I mean, I think that's clearly we've talked about the rulemaking authority at DNR that will have to come along with anything we do in this space, and will be subject to public notice and the chance for review by the legislative process. This is not about opening up something we already aren't doing. And again, from an intent standpoint, because I think that's where your question started, is the intent is to make sure we're clear about when this happens, what we can do to modify that permit, so we're just not fighting over who had the authority to do that. I think what's going to dictate what we do is science. I've heard the chairman say that, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And how we do augmentation, and we're certainly very interested in doing that correctly. We'll have a rulemaking on any of this language related to this augmentation program.
But as we sit here right now, there's no rule, there's no draft of a rule. We would just be looking at this after the fact, after something has already happened, and perhaps money has been spent and somebody has a vested interest in a project that perhaps this General Assembly did not envision when we sat here looking at this language.
I suppose we could think about a lot of potential things that could happen, and your wisdom on thinking about those is probably as good as mine. But I don't think that's what we're doing. We're pretty open about it, and most folks from Fish and Wildlife, frankly, and speaking of EPA, and the federal side of the house know exactly what we're doing in Spring Creek. We have an HCP planning process that involves a lot of federal and state agencies about what we might do in this very critical part of the state where we've got some important species. We've also got sort of our breadbasket from a farming standpoint. So none of this is going to be done without a lot of eyes on it that are frankly as concerned as, or more so, about water quality, about impacts of the river related to augmentation. I think one of the things from a practical standpoint that this committee not need to worry about is whether we're going to get ahead of ourselves on augmentation without a lot of eyes on it. And on the Spring Creek project, I mean, that was done in concert with Fish and Wildlife. So it's a reality that this is again, it's something we're going to do very deliberately. And while we're at it, I think being clear on the permitting side is what we're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Chairman, might I?
I was going to ask Regina if she could let somebody else ask the question, and if we got a minute, come back to her if that's all right.
Sure.
And Mr. Director, I think I asked you yesterday to get something from me, and I think this discussion illustrates it. If you remember the water boards with Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia, and how we've come through those, and the fact that we thought Atlanta needed that water and should use it, but the federal court said no first, and we spent an inordinate amount of money, and that's what I'd asked the director if he could maybe find me what we spent as a state defending the ability of our people to use some water that they badly needed in a time when they want to take it away. And you're going to have legal opinions on both sides. I understand where you're coming from, but I think that what this was put into law simply so our law says this is what we can do, and it does help. The augmentation will help us keep out of EPA's problems and maybe keep it at the state level. And that, I think, is a reason for all of this. As the director said, it's a tool in the toolbox of our state agency to ensure that we can retain some control of what's going on there. And we have to put that in law so the agency can then make rules, and as he said, we have legislative review over those rules. But I think this is a necessary step at this point in time. And just
Let me just say this too, if you would. Between the statewide water plan, the Water Stewardship Act, all these things have paid off for the state of Georgia in the discussions with our neighbors and with the courts, because we're methodically moving along, trying to make ourselves more efficient with the natural resource of water that we have, and we're going down the right roads. It's just taking it step by step by step. I mean, we had a group out of the Great Lakes region of the United States, right there bordering Canada, that called, and they've been looking at a Water Stewardship Act that we passed. It's such a great conservation bill, and they were just like, how in the world did you get this passed? And kind of went through the process of how we did that. But all those things are going to pay off over time. If you go to remodel your house, you go to the store to get plumbing fixtures for that. They're all going to be water saver plumbing fixtures. You can't buy the plumbing fixtures in the state of Georgia anymore that aren't. And over time, that will have a tremendous positive impact on the water resource in this state.
Does anybody else have a question? One, we got two or three. Go ahead, Ellis, and then Margaret and Winfrey.
Might be a question you want to refer to the director, but do y'all have any data on the systems, the different permits that the area uses, or their pivots, or travelers?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure there's data on that.
Yeah, they're about, in the area that you visited, 600 total irrigation systems. About roughly 88% of those are center pivots, and about 12% of those would be the travelers or solid set systems. Is that what you were looking for, sir?
Yeah, and the point I was going to make is these hard-nosed travelers and caper-toed travelers are the ones that will not be able to meet these efficiency of irrigation standards. These center pivots can be modified and brought into standards. And so the most positive thing about this bill is these irrigation standards that's put in there that will allow the agricultural opinion at the same time reduce the amount of water that is lost through inefficiency. And I don't want this fact to be overlooked as the value that's in this bill, because it will play into this whole water scheme.
Margaret.
I just got to I don't know if you want to answer this. So I find this committee very fascinating. I asked to be on the committee, but my training is in mediation, so I'm not one to see the sky is falling. But I've listened to both sides exhaustively on this, and I'm still trying to sort of wrap my mind around all of it. I share Regina's concerns about the definition of augmentation, but I just wanted to mention two concerns and see if you could talk to them. One is in lines 180 through 192. It doesn't really, I don't see where it talks about limiting the amount of water withdrawn. The other is, and I just saw this yesterday, that concerns me, is on lines 191 to 194. You're not allowing, could you talk to why the project is not available for withdrawal on 193 and 194 for the permit fee?
The augmented flow is not for withdrawal. I mean, I'll give you my little personal opinion. When you had a creek that was dried up down there and we start getting augmented some flow in it, if you withdraw the augmented flow, you still got to dry that creek. So you can't win by taking the water out that you're augmenting. When you get in the endangered species zone, you're just going to have multiple problems there because you've withdrawn the augmentation. The only reason that we're augmenting is to keep a flow in that big creek. That's how we really think about that.
Okay, even at the point when there's an overflow of water though?
We don't augment in overflow of water times. We don't augment when times are, like right now, and there's just water flowing.
Mr. Chairman, I think the easiest way to explain that is augmentation will occur at key times in key places within key streams
That's correct.
to stave off an endangered species declaration, to keep fish and wildlife from coming down here, shutting the whole basin down. That's the easiest way I understand it, and it's not going to be enough flow. I mean, we ain't floating battleships. We're trying to keep a mussel that ought to be extinct anyway alive.
Well, I guess for me, I'm thinking about,
good information.
think about what could happen.
Right.
And I mean, I spent part of an afternoon yesterday in education trying to correct, and I understand the consequence of a bill that had a direct impact on schools in the district. So I'm just, we're trying to.
Well, and I do understand that, because anytime you pass a lot of stuff in this building, there's unintended consequences. But this, if you took the augmented flow out, then you're back right where you were with a dry ditch. So that's kind of the way to think about it.
Wimper? Oh, go ahead.
Just
Go ahead.
offer one observation about the unintended potential of that. You're not going to augment without cost, right? I mean, you got to run pumps. No system of augmentation is going to be costly. You're not going to do that unless you need to. And all the language I think you pointed at in the 180s and below is limiting that modification to what would be the intent, which is the amount that got augmented. Instead of trying to find, set some other stream flow number that you would then, reduce to. It's sort of start with that common sense principle that the chairman mentioned, which is just limited to the amount of augmentation. And I think in the practical reality is you're only running those pumps when you have to.
Winford and then Tom Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's up.
I would thank you for the work that you've done on this, particularly as far as about regulating and bringing the irrigation systems into compliance with the more efficient, and that's something really going to be beneficial for our community. I think one, and Mr. Director, you are right, there's a lot of eyes on this, because in our part of the state, agriculture kind of leads it, so we were very, very positive when we started talking about how we're going to move the ship forward. So I guess my first question is, I represent people upstream.
Okay.
Currently, we do have a augmentation system that was put in some years ago. What is the difference between what we're doing now and what you're attempting to do with this system? Because right now we are augmenting.
I suppose in this, if Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Take that.
You run with it.
Representative, let me just say this too. I hail from Albany, Georgia, as well, and if I mess this up, I'm not able to go home.
You already messed it up.
That's right. Fair enough. I always have to remind people that you might get confused with New York.
Yes, sir.
Mom and Dad are still there, so it would be hard to go home. But what from an augmentation standpoint, in other words, pulling it out of the ground because we got a reason. It may be endangered species. It may be some stream flow benefit that we want for the state region. Water quality. I mean, there could be a number of things we might want to do in a stretch of river. And if you look, we're going to have to develop those rules to figure out how long you're going to protect that augmentation. I mean, at some point, that stuff, this is a karst system. Sometimes Spring Creek in particular, you lose it back in the aquifer. So it's not like you're going to protect that augmentation to the Gulf of Mexico. There happens to be a state line there too. But we're going to have rulemaking to figure out the science along how far you're protecting that flow. But today, conceivably, in your Spring Creek project, you could put it in the river and have somebody try to drink it down below. Now, I hadn't looked at our project to see whether there's a surface water withdrawal there. We got a lot of groundwater withdrawals around that project. Most of it's wells down there. So, it's not likely to be a problem. But we're thinking about the next one of these that we need to do up Itchaway somewhere, up Kitchafoonie, where you have, you have many more surface water withdrawal permits that already exist today. And again, if you're not augmenting, there wouldn't be that water in the river anyway for that surface water withdrawal. So it's not really going to impact Spring Creek's thing today, but the experience of Spring Creek has had the state thinking about, okay, we call it the Spring Creek pilot. So it's a pilot, and we may do it again. And if we do it again, where and how's it going to work, and how do we not drink it if we put it in the river?
One of the things that you mentioned is that what I've been hearing everybody say is that we're doing this as the EPA or then sometimes shut us down and say we can't withdraw water for our agriculture community and for our manufacturing base. So I also represent Middle River. And we draw a lot of water to make it. The other part there, you mentioned it is for stream flow benefit. So you mentioned another benefit from augmentation that was not, I don't think that's it.
Well, we keep talking about endangered species as if that's the only reason you might do augmentation. But, we have other species the state cares about. I mean, I can get my DNR people and my WRD people, our cousins in DNR up here and talk to you about all the other species that are not endangered but may very well benefit from not having a stream go down. Water quality too, just having some base flow in the creek. We're not there yet to where we're able to do that on a wide basis, but if you project that several years from now, again, as part of a tool in the toolbox, we may have a series of deployed wells in which we're doing some of this for targeted stretches of river where we're seeing some problems when these droughts come. And we'd like to have it tie in with the ability to sort of protect those flows for a certain distance once you put them in the river. And you can see a deployed system one day that again, as the chairman said, we're not floating battleships here. So we're doing some minimum flow stuff around, but it could be the kind of difference between moderate impacts during a drought and serious. CFS, cubic feet per second. Cubic feet per second. Well, look, Florida, I will say this. If you don't know it from that part of the state, the bullseye from Florida isn't on Atlanta. I mean, it is, but it's also on the whole state. We're all in this together. And I like to say that there's no better issue than the ACF issue to make us one group. Flint Basin and the Chattahoochee Basin. We really are connected. But the reason for this language is there is a practical reality, which is that every bit of flow you kind of are able to protect will indeed flow into Seminole and will indeed one day flow across the line at Woodruff Dam. It's kind of a byproduct of it. But what we're talking about, again, we're not floating battleships here. We're talking about minimum flows for certain distance. And Spring Creek we lose. It's a losing stream. Oftentimes what we do is it goes back in the aquifer when you have times of drought. So, as a practical reality, it's true. You have an unregulated arm of the Flint, and then whatever flows don't remain in the river will one day go into Seminole and will one day go into Appalachian River. And the amounts you have coming out of the Flint will be added to in times of drought by the regulated reservoirs to meet that state line flow requirement of 5,000 CFS. But the language you're looking at, I'm telling you, the language is designed around a Spring Creek-like idea around the basin to deal with protected flows inside for our own purposes.
We give you the opportunity to come in, augment the water, increase the flow stream. And because for some reason, we're not getting enough flow in Florida, we decided we want to pump all the water out of southwest Georgia, out of the aquifers there, and increase the flow stream that's going into Florida. And the water comes directly from my farmers, from my manufacturers. Really, to me, that's a problem. So, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how we're going to shift this language so that at the end of the day, it does not have an adverse impact on my farmers in South Georgia.
In order for that to happen, some lever's going to have to be pulled to force that to happen.
Where's the enough force?
Well, what we've been talking about is the federal court system and the Endangered Species Act. And I'll tell you what is the easiest lever is not to make the state do an affirmative action to pump a bunch of water out of your aquifers. It's to impact agriculture by saying, hey, half of Baker County is not going to irrigate this growth season. I mean, that's the kind of draconian meat cleaver you want to avoid.
Let me get Tom Wimper. Go ahead, Tom Kirby.
Senator, in section 2, line 50, 51, under definition, you got drought condition means any condition which results in a stream flow that is lower than acceptable. Flint River Basin stream flow. Is that acceptable to you, me, or some useless critter down in Florida, or who's determining what acceptable means there?
Well, I think that is where, and I'll direct it, come in on this, but I think you've got certain level of flows you got to meet. Now, and there again, this bill talks about the studies that we want done, and the interconnectivity, understanding the interconnectivity between the surface water, groundwater, all these things, all those things need to be studied. And so we know exactly how this whole system works down there. And so if you get into a flow level that's so low, it really would create a massive problem down there. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to create ways to keep a balance down the southwest Georgia region. If we don't, I'm going to tell you, you won't be sitting here talking to me. You'll be sitting in the court listening to the judge. And his water policy probably is not going to be what the agricultural industry in that southwest Georgia region will need. It'll be uncomfortable.
One other question, then on
Real quick.
on section 4, line 80 and 81, the new language, if the division predicts a severe drought, I don't think Kirk Mellish was working for EPD today. Who's determining what's severe? We don't define that anywhere more than a normal drought, a regular drought, or some drought.
Definition-wise, I'll let them answer that definition, but I can tell you that in September and October, as I was traveling the state, we were headed for a massively severe drought. Okay? And I'm going by a farm that I've been by 9 billion times in my life and never seen a guy bush hogging down in the bottom of the pond before. I'm telling you, that was a crisis. And if we had not gotten a lot of rain this winter, severe drought would have been at hand because it was at hand at that moment. Never seen so many creeks dried up and grass growing everything. And I look at everything when I ride down the road. I look and see what wetlands are doing, what the creeks are doing, what ponds are doing. I look at the flow of the rivers. And on the funeral the other day, and about a month ago, and went over the Flint River. And I look at the Flint River, and it looked mighty nice. But I've been over it where it didn't look so nice. So I think, I don't know how, and I'll let the director, he wants to, I use horse sense. When I see a severe drought, I was staring at one September and October.
Mr. Chairman, let's use a little horse sense here. We got members that's got to go to rules at 9. I got about 5 or 6 speakers want to talk.
Okay.
1 minute apiece. Pat's got a timer. When the buzzer goes off, I'm going to stop you. We ain't giving no free time, because I don't want to lose a quorum. and I can't read these names. Chris Mangioli, Ben Emanuel. Oh, hey, Chris, I didn't realize that was you. Gordon Rogers, Todd Holbrook, and Lauren Joy.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Chris Manganello. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comment here on SB 213, and I want to talk about what's kind of been happening on the edges of this bill, which may answer some of the questions I've already heard. I want to start with stream flow augmentation. As we know, today there's already one project in operation in the Flint River Basin on Spring Creek, which is a lower Flint tributary. DNR is currently pumping groundwater to the surface and putting that water into Spring Creek to manage habitat for endangered mussels. The augmentation language in this bill that you are looking at is not needed to allow this project because it's basically already happening and legal according to existing policy. However, there's another stream flow augmentation project that the augmentation will protect that is connected to a state-funded project that's currently underway in the design phase. In April 2012, the Southwest Georgia Regional Commission submitted an application to the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority for the Governor's Water Supply Program for a $13.5 million aquifer storage and recovery project that they say could eventually produce up to 250 million gallons of water a day at full build-out. All right, there it is.
Thank you.
Any questions? I'd be happy to entertain.
Can I ask what an aquifer water storage project is?
Yes, as described in the Southwest Georgia Regional Commission's application, what they would like to do is they will pull water from the stream bank filtration from the Chattahoochee River and/or the Flint and Upper Floridian aquifer, take that water, basically inject it deep into the ground. They would do this during periods of high flow, and then during periods of drought, they would recover and bring this water back to surface, put it back into Flint River tributaries or the Chattahoochee River for use downstream.
And what's the regulations or the regulatory?
Wait a minute, we can't get into all this. We can't get into all
But
this.
I will go over that with you. I've got information.
Just remember, it's a valuable tool that we don't use in Georgia yet, but 20 other states do. Ben Emanuel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate it. My name is Ben Emanuel. I'm here in Atlanta. Work for a national group called American Rivers. We work on effective, smart water management issues all across the country. I believe where my friend was going with that description of the aquifer project was that the project that was funded by the Governor's Water Supply Program with a state grant in GFA's evaluation system received a 0 score, and yet received, I believe, $4 or $5 million of taxpayer money for that project, despite receiving a 0 score from GFA under the Governor's Water Supply Program. Since he didn't have a chance to finish, I believe that's where he was going with that. You could ask him questions about it, of course. I just wanted to say, I believe there have been some very sharp questions from members of the committee this morning on this language about augmentation that's in the present version of the bill. I believe we've got much smarter ways to keep water flowing in our streams. That's the bottom line here. And we don't need to go about changing the fundamental concepts of how we manage water, how we govern water in this state for all of the public of this state in the context of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ben, for talking about it.
Happy to answer any questions.
Could I just, one quick question, and that is, and I don't really expect an answer, I just know that the former speaker said 13 million, you said 4.5. I just wonder if where the truth lies in that, and I think it's in your statement. So thank you for clarifying that.
Gordon.
Yes. It was originally an application for 13.5,
And it's 4.6 now. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I've run 2-minute drills in my career, but I'm going to run a 1-minute drill. My name's Gordon Rogers. I work for Flint Riverkeeper. I'm the Riverkeeper. We have about 2,000 members, and on our board alone, we have 16 withdrawal permits down in southwest Georgia. I'm sure there are quite a few more in the general membership. I hadn't counted them up. We're disappointed in the bill. It came out of the Senate with a provision in it to look at the whole Flint, because it would help the farmers quite a bit to be getting some benefit out of improvements in the upper Flint above where this substitute currently works. That's just a disappointment. But the danger is exactly what was pointed out through the line of questioning so far. The division has the authority right now to condition permits below an augmentation project. That would be laborious for them. They would probably be challenged through court, but those are our rights. We currently have those rights, and this would foreshorten those rights, just like my comments are foreshortened.
Thank you, Gordon. Todd?
Todd Holbrook, Georgia Wildlife Federation. I guess I'm here to speak on behalf of the shoal bass. It is an extremely important game fish in this state. In fact, it's unique to the Deep South. And the 375 cubic feet per second is a significant amount of water, and it looks like that may actually impact the shoal bass. If you want to get a visual on that, go to the Chattahoochee, go up to Lake Lanier, the Chestatee River, where it dumps just before it dumps into Lake Lanier. That's about how much water you're talking about if this project goes to full build out. That is significant to fisheries like shoal bass, and if you haven't had a fly rod in your hand, you really ought to, because it's an experience. It's a world-class fishery.
Thank you, Tom. Lauren?
That's the shortest I've ever heard.
That's right.
Hi, my name is Lauren Joy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm an associate attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center and work with the Georgia Water Coalition, and we oppose the bill as it's currently written with that augmentation language in it. I just want to point out, it was said that the augmentation projects would only occur during times of severe drought, but my reading of that section doesn't limit it to that time frame. In fact, there's no mention of the timing of those projects in the bill itself. And there are other questions here. We don't know who, well, the one question that has come up repeatedly to me in this is, why is EPD not going through the permitting process that's already in the law, and instead is going through this notification process and only an opportunity for a hearing after they notify farmers that they're not allowed to use these augmented flows. I think there's also a problem with how do you, as a practical matter, figure out what flow is augmented versus what flow is already in the river. And I think there are questions about who's going to police this process, and thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions if I can.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me.
Go ahead.
And, I was just going to say, if that does get all of our speakers in, I'd like to make a motion at the proper time.
Ross, do you have anything else as the author? Thank you, Lauren.
I appreciate it, and my total intent, as it's been the last 9 years, is to make sure we continue to work on water quality in this state, whether you're in North Georgia, whether you're in Southwest Georgia, you're in coastal Georgia, I don't care where you're at, we've got to make a positive impact. And we've been doing that, courts have recognized that we've been doing that, and I think that I would just appreciate your affirmative vote on this bill, and let's keep moving ahead. And let me speak one thing to they talk about the upper plant.
Do it quick. You the one that's got to go.
I got some bills I got to do now. But I ain't no direction too that after the session, I'm concerned about it all. You know, this is directed toward the lower plant. That's because that's the way that policy was directed in law and going forward, you know, back when they did all that. But I'm going to be taking a look at the upper plant. I'm concerned about everything. I'm concerned about interconnectivity of all these systems. And so you don't have to put something in a bill for me to get me already on the case working on it. I'm going to be taking a look at that, doing a study on the upper plant also. Thank you.
Buddy?
Mr. Chairman, I would move do pass for Senate Bill 213 LC 400389S.
The second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No. Wait a minute.
You want to do hands?
Yeah, I need a hand.
All in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All opposed? 5. All right, Buddy, gonna be handled on the floor.
That fine legal drug pusher from South Georgia.
All right, thank y'all very much for coming.
Better than you say it sometimes.
We have 2 more little issues we got to handle. One of them is Senate Bill 91. as a substitute, is Tyler here? This is Senator Harper's bill, but I'm going to handle it if that's okay, because we did some changing to it, and he's been gone to a Leadership Georgia meeting. And
actually, I have a committee meeting with the chairman that just left, Mr. Chairman.
well, you run on and we'll see if we can do this.
Oh, no, I think he needs to present there, Mr. Chairman. I gotta go to rules, but I really think the chairman of the Transportation Committee may be aggravated about what I did to him yesterday. Mr.
Yeah, I think he is.
And I think that, stand up when you stand up now. I'll forego and leave it to your due diligence. I appreciate your work on that bill and look forward to working with you moving forward.
Senate Bill 91, when it passed out of the Senate, was taking some language out of emerging crop language. We've been trying for several years, and I've got articles here from USA Today talking about McDonough, Georgia, and some from Farm Bureau, some from the Huffington Post, and it talks about the average age of farmers across Georgia and the United States. For every 3 to 65, there's only one that's 35. I'm an old guy for the average age in Georgia. Sam's a young guy. But what we are doing, and Chairman England and I have been working on this along with Chairman Burns, to be able to set up a fund for new and beginning farmers to be able to get some operating capital money. If you look at the substitute, there's a list of what they can use it for. It'll be run through Georgia Development Authority. The language you're looking at is not exactly what we needed, but we had to get the bill moving so we can either fix it in conference or get it worked out. We got money appropriated already with a promise from Georgia Development Authority to match it, and it'll set up a fund for new and beginning farmers to be able to get money. You know how banks have gotten nowadays, where you got to have 475% of whatever you might want to get, and land don't count. So that's what the purpose of this is. If y'all would pass it out where we can get to working on it, Tyler would appreciate it, and Terry England and I would too. So is there any questions on it? I know the language you got in front of you is a little bit confusing, but I'll try to answer them if you have any. Is that a second? All right. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you. One other issue we have, it's our job, according to the Equine Commodity Commission, to appoint an ex officio to that board. The Senate does one, and the House Ag Committee does one. Normally the Senate does the South Georgia one, and we do the North Georgia one, just because previously the John Bullock was from South Georgia and I was from North Georgia. We just kept that going, even though Chairman Wilkinson's further north than I am. But we set up a subcommittee, and I appreciate y'all meeting and discussing it, and you have, and Bubba was the chairman of it. You want to tell us what you decided?
Yes, sir. Chairman of the subcommittee, three nominees, and by unanimous choice, the subcommittee appointed Mr. Boyd McLaughlin to serve in that capacity. I think we have a bio presented in our folder this morning that pretty well gives qualifications and electability to care for this position.
And this has to be done in odd-numbered years, and this may be the last meeting in the odd-numbered year, so I don't know yet. But anyway, is that a motion for, you making a motion for Mr. Boyd? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank y'all very much for sitting through all this early in the morning on a Friday. Y'all can sleep late on Saturday.
Yes, sir.
I have compiled an awful lot of information off the U.S. Geological Survey and what other states do.